Welcome to Insights into Success, where with your host Paul Dodds, we hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. Right, but welcome to Insights into Success, where today a special guest is Alicia Butler Pierre. For some reason, I want to say Alicia Pierre Butler, but anyway, it is Butler Pierre.
People do that all the time.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I have no idea why. That happens often, Paul.
I think it flows from the tongue easier.
Oh, okay.
Pierre Butler. That, for me at least, that's
okay.
why.
That's interesting.
But you're originally a chemical engineer. You've turned yourself into an entrepreneur and a podcast host. And really interesting, you're the winner of the most unexpectedly interesting interview for 2021 by Binge Factor. So yes. I have to start by asking you, how do you feel having won that award? What did that mean to you?
It was really funny, and it was unexpected that I would receive the most unexpectedly interesting award. So the host of that particular podcast, it's called The Binge Factor. Her name is Tracy Hazard. She's been podcasting, for 10 or 11 years.
Wow.
And she interviewed me on her show. And I think because when people hear about things like operations and systems and processes and business infrastructure, Paul, it's not the most exciting topic.
No.
But I have a way of making it interesting. And I think that's why I really surprised her during our conversation. So that's how that award came about.
Yeah, it's quite funny, but testament to you that obviously you can make something that, as you say, doesn't sound the most exciting, actually, obviously quite interesting. So hopefully we're going to see a little bit of that shortly. One of the things I want to ask you just to kick it off is about your surname, because I love your name. I think it's so pretty, and I'd like to know the history of it.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, my first name is Alicia, so that is the Spanish pronunciation. Most people would say Alicia, but it's actually pronounced Alicia. And Butler is my maiden name.
Yeah.
And Pierre is my married name, my husband's name.
Right.
So that's how it's come about. I'm originally from Louisiana. I don't know if you're familiar with.
I am. I've traveled in America quite a lot. So.
Okay. So I grew up in Louisiana, and for those who are listening, with the U.S., New Zealand, Australia were also colonized, but Louisiana was colonized by the French. So you meet a lot of people with French names. From the state of Louisiana. So that's kind of some quick background, and I'm glad you asked that question. I don't think anyone has ever asked me the origin of my name before.
And tell me, and you won't, well, I don't know, you might know the answer to this, but how would your husband feel if you changed the order to Alicia Pierre Butler?
Well, I don't think he would mind at all, but I know it's pretty standard that it's not standard, because I could very easily just drop the Butler altogether once I got married. I've been married for 15 years now, but I actually, Paul, made a conscious decision to keep my maiden name, and I'll tell you why. Because when I started using platforms like LinkedIn, and I was on LinkedIn when it first started, so I've been on there for a really long time. And what was interesting to see was the number of people with my name, the number of other people who had my name also. And I would always think to myself, if I ever got married, I would have two last names and not just one, just as another way of distinguishing myself from the crowd of other Alicia Butlers that are out there. So
Well, it definitely gives like a high class kind of impression, that you're not just an ordinary person. You've got this double barreled surname. So to me, when
oh,
I read that, I was like, wow, that sounds nice. I like it.
oh, that's okay. Well, thank you for that. That
But I
makes me
just tell
feel
your
really
husband you
good.
need to swap the order around. It should be Pierre Butler.
And you might be onto something because again, so many people switch those two names. So that's
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, just definitely from my point of view, it just flows easier from the tongue with Pierre Butler instead of Butler Pierre. Kind of Butler kind of feels like that's the end of it, and then you tapped on the Pierre. Whereas the other way, Pierre Butler, to me, it just flows better. So yeah, that's my thoughts anyway, for what it's
Okay.
worth.
I will take that into consideration. Thank you, Paul.
So tell me, like, what was it like for you growing up? Can you give me a little bit of a background? It's up to you how much you share, but I like to ask my guests about their upbringing just to give a little bit of insight into how they've come to do what they're doing. And, is there something in their upbringing that's influenced them to be where they are, which generally there is. Are you able to share with us a little bit about your upbringing?
Absolutely. Well, my parents, I was born and raised in Louisiana. So, for those who are listening, if you're not familiar with the US, Louisiana is what's considered to be in the deep south, the deep southern part of the United States, right above the Gulf of Mexico. And I grew up in the southernmost part of that particular state. So, I'm
Yeah.
from Baton Rouge, which means
Rouge.
red stick in French. And it's about a 1 hour drive from New Orleans. So I know
Yeah.
many people know, or they've at least heard of New Orleans. And my father was in the military, and my mother worked. My father was out of the military once I came along, but my mother worked as a health inspector. I don't know what the equivalent of that career would be in New Zealand, but basically these are the people who go into any place that serves food to the general
Yep.
public. So
Yeah, we
restaurants.
use the same name.
Okay, great,
Yeah.
perfect. So that kind of gives you an idea of order and
Yeah.
structure and
Yeah. True.
organization. And I also went to private school, Catholic school, from
Yeah.
the age 5 until 13, 14.
Right.
And I didn't think about it. Sometimes, Paul, you when you're growing up, you don't really think about certain things, but it's not until you become an adult and you look back on your childhood and you start to connect certain dots. Well, that's
Yeah.
what happened with me. I remember, I think I may have been in my late 20s, early 30s, and I remembered reflecting on my childhood. And when you go to Catholic school, there are the nuns there, and everything is very methodical. There was a lot of repetition with certain things. And I thought about it and I realized how much that shaped who I am today,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
my appreciation for process, my appreciation for structure, for order, for organization. I swear they had a process for everything. Um, and it really laid a foundation, I believe, for what would eventually become a huge part of my life's work. But I didn't think about that growing up.
No.
But yeah, as I reflect on my childhood, that definitely played a major factor in the person that I've become today.
And how did you come about to study chemical engineering of all things?
Oh, interesting story there. I actually wanted to be a journalist, Paul.
Oh, wow, that's a bit
Believe it or
different.
not. I know, right? Completely using a completely different side of your brain. But I enjoyed literature. I enjoyed reading, and I know how much you like to talk about the books that your guests read. I was an avid reader growing up. I loved writing, and I would actually participate in writing contests when I was a child. But when I was in high school, when I was about 16 years old. I took a chemistry course.
Yeah.
And my teacher noticed my aptitude for chemistry. So it was this untapped skill that I didn't even know I had until I was exposed to the subject itself. And I loved it. I absolutely loved chemistry. And by the time I started applying to university, I'll never forget, this same teacher took a vested interest in what degree I would pursue. And I told her chemistry. And she said, well, you might want to rethink that, because as a chemist, you would have to go all the way up to the PhD level before you would start to make really good money. But if you pursued a degree in chemical engineering, you can go to school in 4 or 5 years and come out making really good money. And so that's what I did, Paul. I didn't know a thing about chemical engineering. I knew chemistry, but I didn't know chemical engineering. I didn't take any advanced math classes when I was in school. I went to a school that actually had an engineering program. I just wasn't a part of it. Yeah. So that was literally how it happened. Wow. I took the advice of that teacher. God bless her. Her name is Mrs. Kablis, and she's actually Ukrainian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was from Ukraine, and she was just such a kind teacher. She was stern and tough, but she saw that I had an aptitude for chemistry, and I credit her 100% with steering me in that direction of chemical engineering.
Right. And so you went to university and studied that. And what was it like when you got out into the big wide world of working? How did you find that? Was that what you expected, or
no?
No, it's not what I want.
No, it was not what I expected at all. Oh my gosh, Paul, it was awful. It was awful. I have to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And it was awful because, so as a chemical engineer, you typically most chemical engineers, if you work in an oil refinery or a chemical plant, you're usually working as what they call a process engineer. And that's what I was doing. I was making Roundup. I worked at Monsanto. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay. I hope this shouldn't change the nature of our relationship.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just you're doing a job, but yeah, okay.
No judgment. Okay.
No.
But yeah, I was making Roundup, Paul. I was making Roundup, and I'll never forget when I first started working there, the patent on Roundup expired about 1.5 years after I started working there. And that's when the company started really making a shift into genetically modified seeds.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's when they started making that change. But yeah, I was making poison. And if that poison, for whatever reason, did not meet certain specifications, as the process engineer, I had to literally figure out what went wrong in the process to cause that particular batch of Roundup to not meet certain specifications. The other type of engineer that many chemical engineers will work as is what's known as a design engineer. And that's when you are literally designing the equipment in order to refine oil on a massive scale, or produce Roundup on a massive scale, or produce whatever the chemical is. So yeah, it was not what I expected at all. Being in a predominantly male environment, I should preface this by saying that was not the part that was a shock to me, because I had dealt with that at university.
Yeah.
But what was a shock was just the issues related around human resources, just HR. There were always employee morale issues. And I used to just be fascinated at how we were able to produce anything There was always fighting and bickering, and it was such a toxic. I mean, we were making poison, and the work environment itself was toxic, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. I have to be very honest with you, and I needed an out, and business was my out. I realized when I was working as an engineer, there were accountants who would come and visit us once a month, and they would bring these reports with them, Paul. And it was as though these accountants were speaking Greek. I didn't understand the language of business. I didn't understand accounting. I didn't understand, assets and liabilities and equity and, all of those kinds of things. I just didn't have an understanding of it. And I certainly did not understand how daily production schedules were being driven by the market. I didn't see the connection because I was in such a large company. We were in silos, working in silos. You kind of do what you're told to do, and you have no insight into what's going on throughout other parts of the company. So I just had trouble understanding that connection. But once I decided to go back to business school, that's when I understood, oh, there's this thing called supply and demand.
Oh.
And it's actually being tracked every day. And if if demand goes up, then that means as producers, we have to meet that demand. But if demand goes down, that means we can't overproduce. So that's why sometimes our production schedule might be, let's run at 100% capacity on one day, and the next day we may be told to run at 50% capacity. I didn't understand that connection.
Right.
So some good did come out of that experience. It wasn't completely negative, but it was not at all what I thought it was going to be, Paul, when I finished university.
And do you think that was just that particular company, or do you think it was reflective of lots of corporates out there, and in particular in that sort of industry?
I think this is something that plagues many of us because when you're in school, it's all theory.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have the opportunity to actually apply your knowledge. You may have the benefit of doing an internship, and even with that, I had an internship, but it still did not prepare me. I should say this. It's great at teaching you the technical skills of whatever it is you are studying. If you are studying journalism, you're taught to write well. If you are studying engineering, you're taught how to calculate a math problem or how to solve a particular thing that has gone wrong in a process. What they don't teach are the interpersonal skills, the interpersonal communication skills, the leadership skills, the things that can sometimes be known as soft skills. Yeah. That's what was missing from my education. So yeah, I had the technical aptitude, but I really struggled navigating the corporate landscape. There are some unwritten rules that you just don't know, and you have to learn. It's trial by fire. And I wish more universities incorporated this type of training into these different programs to really prepare people for what's to come in the workplace, because it can be incredibly cutthroat.
Yeah.
When you're in, especially if it's a very large organization, because you're trying to climb that corporate ladder, and there are some people who will do any and everything that it takes to climb that ladder.
Yeah. And that could be a real shock to the system, as you say, like when you're not expecting it, you're not exposed to it, to suddenly get there and realize that you might not progress based on your ability. There might be other factors that come into play that, result in some people getting promoted as opposed to others.
Absolutely. That is exactly right. And I personally wish my program, my chemical engineering program, would have incorporated and actually made it mandatory to take certain other types of courses, business courses being among that, but also leaderships courses, communication courses, things like that, because you really do have to be a well-rounded individual and have exposure to all of these different facets of in order to prepare you for going out into the real world and being an adult.
Yeah, a scary thing. So tell me about business school, how that went and what you did after graduating.
Sure. So I was in an executive program. So I went to school at night. I was still working full time during the day. At this point, I actually left Monsanto and I started working for a smaller family-owned engineering consulting firm.
Okay.
And that really opened my eyes, Paul, to, oh, okay, so not every job has to have the layers of bureaucracy and and the beautiful thing about working in a smaller organization was that I had exposure into every facet of the company. I had a chance to see what the folks in sales and marketing were doing. I had a chance to see what people in the HR department were working on, the folks in IT, information technology. Yeah. Whereas before, when I was in this very large, huge enterprise, I had no insights into that whatsoever. So I started working at that smaller engineering consulting firm. I was going to business school at night, and I loved it. Oh my gosh, business school opened up a whole new world for me. I no longer saw anything the same, again, because I was being exposed to all of the different facets of commerce, and I started to understand the interconnectivity of it all, and how what happens here in the marketplace, the impact that it can have on your day-to-day operations, and how what the sales and marketing team is doing, the impact that can have on the technologies that might be used. It just opened up a whole new world for me, and I absolutely loved it. It was truly the missing link for me as not just in my career, but I would say just as a professional in general. I really think everyone, again, regardless of what you plan to do in life, take some basic business courses, take some basic courses in finance, marketing, operations, leadership, strategy, management. It will open up your eyes, and you will start to see things in a completely different light.
And so how did you come about to start your own business? How did that all come into play?
Okay, so when I finished business school, I had this feeling, Paul, that I needed to get out of New Orleans quick, fast, and in a hurry. Couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense to anyone. I sold my home. I quit my job. So I abruptly quit my job at this engineering consulting firm. And I relocated across the country to Atlanta, Georgia. So I am in the same time zone as New York. I'm south of New York City. And I knew one person when I relocated. I knew one person.
Wow, that was a big leap then.
It was a huge leap. And of course, everybody thought that I was crazy. But I couldn't shake this feeling that I had to leave. I had to leave. Couldn't explain it. Didn't know what I was coming into. But I looked at Atlanta, Paul, and I looked at the number of companies that had their corporate headquarters here. So Coca-Cola is headquartered here, Delta Airlines, UPS, the Home Depot, Chick-fil-A. I mean, there were so many of these companies. And I really thought, I'm going to get a job at Coca-Cola. That's what I thought I was going to do, Paul. And that did not happen. That did not happen, my friend. But what did happen was 2 months of what appeared to be soulless job searching.
Yeah.
And when I say soulless, this was 2005. So it was right around the time when companies were moving everything online. Gone were the days of filling out paper applications, job applications, or mailing in a copy of your resume. Those days were gone. Everything was moving online. And it just seemed as though I would spend hours each day filling out these applications online, and then I wouldn't hear anything one
Yeah.
way or another. Even if it was a rejection, I mean, you just wouldn't hear anything. And that can really, again, it's soul crushing.
Mm.
And after about 60 days of that, a good 2 months, I had had enough. And I told myself, for the amount of time, effort, and energy that I'm spending looking for a job, working for someone else, I could redirect that same time, effort, and energy into creating an opportunity for myself. And that is
Wow.
how Equilibria came about. And I
Wow.
started thinking, well, what is it that I'm naturally really good at? What are
Yeah.
my natural skills, talents, and abilities? It's I've succeeded on different jobs that I've had in the past, Paul, not because I was the smartest person in the room, but usually because I may have been the most organized person in the room. And so when
Sure.
I started Equilibria, it was actually a professional organizing company, believe it or not.
Huh?
So I was,
Okay.
yeah, I was going into people's homes. I was organizing. Now here's another interesting thing. The people that I worked with, they were not hoarders, not by any stretch of the imagination, nor were they chronically disorganized. These were people who were usually operating home-based businesses. And things were becoming a bit chaotic and they were a little messy because they didn't have systems and processes in place.
Ah,
That's
interesting.
how I started. So I realized it's more than just making things look tidy. It's more than just tidying up, because you can
Yeah.
tidy up something and aesthetically, yes, it looks better, but then 2 weeks later, it's a mess all over
Yes,
again.
again. Yeah.
Why? Because they don't have a system in place. And that's when I started to tap into my engineering skill set as a process engineer. And I started to create these processes for those organizing clients. And that's what gave them lasting results. And over the years, Paul, what has happened is it's shift from professional organizing to business infrastructure.
So it's interesting. So it's a real evolution for you. You didn't, you started out, but obviously you were always open to seeing opportunities. So even though you started out just doing organizing, obviously your mindset, your outlook was very much open to identifying opportunities. And as they came along, you've gradually sort of moved and pivoted, as we like to say these days, and
Mhm.
and have come to where you are now, which is really quite remarkable and interesting.
Thank you. And I really do believe that is what you just said is the number one reason that I'm still in business today, is because I would listen to the feedback from my customers. And that's
Yeah.
how the business evolved. Because if I had just listened to myself and said, well, yeah, I know that's what they're saying, but this is what I think it should be. It should still be a professional organizing company. Oh my goodness. It probably would have failed years ago. But because I was listening to the feedback from customers and really listening to things that they were saying and things that they were asking for, that's what's contributed to the longevity.
Yeah, and I think, like, I talk to a lot of people about the whole concept of success, which, it doesn't have to be financial. It can mean lots of things depending on what your interests are. But one thing for me is that we can all have goals in life, but that it's important to be flexible in how we get there. That if you're just like, okay, this is the route, or the route, as Americans like to say, I'm going to take, and that's how I'm going to get there, you may not get there. But if you go there knowing where you want to get to ultimately, but knowing that the road's going to zig and zag, and you might have to take a few turns here and there, then you're more likely to actually get there. And with you, you have been very much open to, you're not quite sure where this is all going to go, but hey, I'm going to keep my eyes open. I'm just going to go for the ride and see where it takes me. That strikes
exactly
me as
right.
being an important point in your success and other successes by having that attitude.
Absolutely. And one thing I had to do a long time ago was check my ego at the door and humble myself to receive the feedback. Because the other thing we have to keep in mind, Paul, is if people didn't care, they wouldn't say anything.
Yeah, that's a good
But
point.
when people care about you and care about your success and they want to see you win, and they share things with you that they think can help you, listen, because they don't have to give that advice to you. They could definitely keep that information all to themselves, but they're willing to share that with you because they see, sometimes people see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And if there's anything that I've learned in my life, starting at Monsanto, I remember we would have these performance evaluations. And during those performance evaluations of the engineers, they would always ask us, do you want to go along the management path or the technical path? I always chose the technical path. But my boss was constantly trying to steer me along the management path. And I didn't understand why. And I would ask her why. And she said, you have an amazing ability to be able to communicate with people at every level of this organization. But I was just being myself. I didn't get it. I didn't understand that was a trait or a skill that not everybody possessed. I just didn't, I didn't see that. I didn't understand why that was considered valuable. And I certainly didn't understand how it would make me a good manager. I was safe and comfortable on the path, but all along people were trying to steer me in a different direction, and I resisted initially. And now look at me.
But you know what, maybe though, I always believe that, things, I say things happen for a reason, but maybe another way of looking at it is you accept what has happened in the past and always look forward. It's probably the preferable way I like to look at it these days. So, you could have bought into what she was saying earlier on, but maybe there was still some lessons you needed to learn, things that you needed to go through. You weren't ready for that. And obviously when you were ready, then you became open to it. And then the rest is history. Things have dramatically changed.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you're just forced into
that's
it.
Right. And sometimes that's a good thing too, isn't it?
Right.
So tell me, I just sort of now want to kind of tap in a little bit to your expertise and, the skills and that you can offer and the knowledge that you've got. And I think one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is that, every business owner wants an efficient back office. Obviously, every business is different, but I'm just thinking in terms of general small businesses, what are the sort of things that you see that people do wrong? And what are some simple things that people need to do to kind of try and, make their back office more efficient?
There are several things. One, and maybe I can speak in generalities here from a business infrastructure perspective. So definitely have your processes documented. I would say that is one of the most critical missing factors from so many, and not just small businesses, even the very large organizations as well. You have to document your knowledge, especially if you're in the services business, but also if you're producing a product, because it's all about consistency, Paul. As your company starts to grow and you add more people to your team, is there a guarantee that John is going to produce something or deliver a service the same way that Maria will? And if not, why? Well, oftentimes it boils down to whether or not they've been given guidelines for how to deliver that product or that service. Process documentation, I would say, is one of the most critical things that we can all do as businesses, business owners, to get a handle on our back office operations. Some other key things that people probably would likely just overlook, but they can be so important and so profound in gaining a level of transparency that may not currently exist in your company, are things like transparent job descriptions, having an organizational chart that really shows people what your company looks like on the inside.
Yeah.
And when you do it the right way, it also shows people where the path for promotion may exist within your company. There's also your digital records management systems, your physical records management systems, as well as how is your physical workspace actually organized. Those are all things that business infrastructure would help you figure out. And that's
okay, well,
how
Okay, well, I've got a big question for you there.
Okay.
This is all sounds great, but I see one major hurdle, and I've experienced this myself. Is okay, so you're the business owner. You go ahead, you spend all this time documenting, your processes, etc., just like you've described. How the heck do you get buy-in from the employees and get it actually implemented? Because I see it so much. Someone goes and does this lovely chart or lovely documentation for a process, and it's given to the employees and it goes out the window and they carry on doing it the way they want, or they'll do it that way for a short while and then it all is forgotten and they revert back. How do you make that ingrained so that people will consistently adhere to the processes you put so much effort into creating in the first place?
Okay, so something that I did not hear you say is actually either asking them to document the processes or getting them involved in the process of the documentation. You absolutely have to get people involved. I can tell you right now, if you created something for me that I have to follow, I'm not going to do it, Paul. But if you come to me and say, hey, I'm just being honest, and that's how most human beings are. But if you instead said, Alicia, I really think we need to capture this process. Can we sit down and work on this together?
Yeah.
Now I feel that you value my input. I have a stake. I have a stake and a vested interest in this now. But if you wrote something for me and you're not even the person doing the actual work, that's actually offensive to me. No, Paul, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it. But if you get me in the room with you at the same time as you're starting to identify, well, first of all, what processes do we have to document in the first place? We have to first identify what needs to be documented. And then if you give me some basic guidelines for actually starting to write down some of the steps or some of the key things that I work on, and then you say, this is great, Alicia. Well, now I'm going to come behind you and we're going to make sure we fill in all of the gaps so that no important information has been left out. Would you mind taking a look at this now and letting me know if I missed anything? And I review it and I said, nope, Paul, this looks good. And it's like, okay, well, from now on, your performance is going to be based on how your performance will be measured by the way you do this process. Are you in agreement?
Okay. So, all right. So that makes perfect sense. How do you then deal with it though? That say these people, and let's assume there's a group of them are involved in mapping out the process, but what say some of them leave? And then you've got new employees coming in that weren't involved in designing the process. How do you get the buy-in from them so that they will carry on and not dive off in their own direction?
Okay, so that's actually the better scenario to be in, because these are new people coming in. So those processes, that is part of your training for that new employee.
Right.
So it's already been documented, it's already been captured. Those new employees will actually appreciate the fact that you haven't just released them to the wild, and you've given them a blueprint for success on that particular job, in performing that particular job. How many times have we seen people who start a new job and they're just sitting there thinking, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? And so they just start doing what they think they should be doing.
Yeah.
And they may get fussed at, they may get in trouble. But again, as leaders, we have to blame the process or the lack thereof before we blame the people. If we don't have anything documented, then do we really have the right to yell at people, to fire them, when we haven't even given them the guidelines in order to perform a particular process? So Paul, despite what you may be thinking, that's actually the better scenario, is when you have fresh blood, so to speak, and it's part of that onboarding package. Your process has become a part of that onboarding package, just as that organizational chart becomes of that new employee's onboarding package. And they can see, wow, this is what I'm supposed to do. Here's something that Monsanto did really well, and I think this is true of most manufacturing facilities, most manufacturing companies. Because they are producing a product and they absolutely cannot have inconsistency in the way the physical product is produced, they have to have processes. It is not up for debate, my friend. It is, you must have it. You must follow it. When I first started working at Monsanto, literally my first week on the job, they had me follow a shift of technicians. So sometimes I would work 12 hours during the day. Sometimes I worked 12 hours during the night. I followed this one shift, and they literally handed me a physical operations manual that had all of the processes for producing that portion of the round, that part of the Roundup process. Everything was documented. Everything was documented. And that kind of became, for lack of a better word, it became like my Bible. And that was what I constantly referenced. And that was how I learned how to do well and how to succeed on the job. And we have to take that same mindset into the services side of businesses as well. Manufacturing, again, it's not a question of whether or not it needs to be done. It has to be done. Everybody knows that. But with services, it's still very much loosey-goosey. Not everyone understands the value, but if you go and ask anyone that works in a manufacturing facility, and they will tell you, yes, absolutely, we have documented processes.
Yeah.
We all know what this particular product must look like before we ship it out to our customers.
Yeah. So so someone joins, they weren't involved in documenting it, so they're coming in, it's already in place. Do you think, though, it's important, though, for them to feel that at some point that there's a culture such that they would be able to come forward with their contribution if they felt that, say, like the system could be tweaked in some way and improved, that you've created an environment which is such where they feel that they can actually contribute and share their ideas, as opposed to, no, this is the way we've done it. We've done it for 20 years. Don't argue, just do it, be quiet, carry on.
So that goes, so company culture, that goes back to what we call in Lean Six Sigma, adopting a culture of continuous improvement. So nothing is static.
Yeah.
Just because you've documented your processes, it does not mean that it's static and that it's intended to be that way forever. Technologies will change. I mean, think about software. If you are capturing a process, Paul, and let's say that process involves the use of, Monday.com, because that's a popular project management tool right now, or Trello, Asana. You substitute the technology. Well, these technologies are constantly making updates. So you may have documented a process based on the way a previous version of the software works, but once that software has made a significant update, you'll have to go back and update that process to reflect those changes, to reflect those updates. And I should also clarify what I mean when I say documentation. I think that also can cause some people to almost want to break out in hives when they think of the thought of having to document a process. Step 1, you do this. Step 2, this. Step 3, that. You can take something as simple as your phone and literally start recording yourself. With all of the voice recording technologies that are out there, Google Voice, for example, you can actually verbalize how you're doing something and it will type it out for you. There are many things that you could probably just use screen recording software, whether it be Zoom, Loom, Camtasia. There's so many different screen recording softwares that are out there. It does not have to be that standard operating procedure that we may have seen 20 years ago in a big, thick, clunky operations manual. You can digitize all of this. It doesn't have to take you a long time to start documenting those processes. The most important thing is to at least make an attempt to start getting information out of people's heads and onto proverbial paper. I think there was another point that I wanted to make. I forgot what you were asking about, what your original question was. Forgive me, but there was something else I wanted to circle back to, and I've lost my train of thought. I apologize.
No, that's okay. It was just about, a lot of small businesses out there, what's some general tips on what they can do to try and help make their back office more efficient?
Yes. So obviously, definitely processes. And I'd like to show something to you, Paul. We spend so much time talking about technology in the world today. And don't get me wrong, digital technologies are fantastic.
Yeah.
But I actually use low-tech, predominantly analog tools to help these small businesses, and not just small businesses too, because I still work with large organizations. In fact, I've done several projects for Coca-Cola as a consultant, just not as an employee, which is, again, you never know how opportunities will show up. I wanted the opportunity to work for them as an employee, but the opportunity instead presented itself, for me to be a consultant. So I use stick figures and index cards. Okay.
Yeah.
So just using tools as simple as this, low tech, very inexpensive, but just using something like a stick figure, and this is laminated. This is a product of my company's, by the way. And just these little index cards where you would write down the activities, every single task or activity that is performed in your company, no matter how complex or how mundane. And you start to organize all of those different tasks into departments. And then once you've figured out what those tasks are, how they're organized into departments, then you can assign, I may ask you, Paul, for activity A1, in a perfect world, if you had access to all of the resources that you needed, who ideally should perform activity A1? And you may say, well, Alicia, that's me. I'm the CEO. This is what I do. And it's like, no, Paul, in a perfect world, should you really be, answering voicemail, 2 hours a day? Could that really be assigned to an office manager if you had an office manager? It gets people, because it's very visual, it's very tactile. You can get several people in the room at the same time having discussions about things that they may have never talked about before. It increases the level of transparency. But just from these two simple tools alone, Paul, you can figure out what work needs to be performed in your company, how that work is organized into departments, the ideal role that should perform each activity, and then how are those activities actually performed. That's where the processes come into play. Using those two simple tools alone, I guarantee anyone who's listening to this right now, you just have to take my word for it, but you can also go and check me out, check out my work online, and you'll see the testimonials. This works. It's simple, it's easy, and it's highly effective. So
Yeah,
I would encourage
very visual.
anyone. Yeah, very, very visual. And you know what else? This is probably also a huge selling factor, is that it's quick.
Yeah.
Imagine if someone told you, hey Paul, we need you to come up with those job descriptions, and we need you to have 10 processes documented over the next 30 days, and you're just gonna sit there like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? I would rather watch grass grow. That would be more exciting than this.
Yeah.
But doing it this way, it's quick. I have been inside of organizations that have even very large teams. And when I say large, for a small business, having a team of about 50 people is large.
Yeah.
And they get so excited. They get so excited because they're working together. They're having these conversations that they've never had before, and they're moving all these index cards around on a table. They're moving these different stick figures that they see. They're changing the names of different roles and positions. It's a beautiful thing to witness, and I'm happy to share some workshops that I've recorded. They're virtual workshops, but you can still kind of get the point, because unfortunately my clients won't allow me to record these actual sessions, but I'm more than happy to share that with your audience if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great. And I think listening to you, what I like about it is I think it's a fast way to get buy-in and get some decisions made. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot with small businesses is a lot of the business owners, their businesses just evolve, and they get so engrossed in doing the day-to-day, and they don't step out of it to work on their business. They're too busy in the business. And I think what you're talking about is a great way to try and visualize for them the importance that they actually need to step out of their business and work on it. And this is a process of working on it, just getting them to think about what they're doing, who's doing what, why should they be doing that, should someone else be doing that, and helping to streamline and make their business much more efficient. Because the vast majority of small businesses never grow to be anything other than very small. And one of the reasons I think is because they never develop the systems, because they haven't talked to maybe someone like you to make them efficient and put them in a position where they can actually contemplate to actually scale their business.
I completely agree with you, Paul. I completely agree with you. And then there are some businesses that they've invested in the sales and the marketing and the promotion and the PR, the publicity, the social media, and they've done such a great job at doing that they go from the problem of not having enough customers to a new problem. They have too many customers. And to your point, if they don't invest in working on the business, and when we say working on, it's all of this stuff that we're talking about, building that business infrastructure. They don't get that in place. You can still fail because you have too many customers now.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm grateful to you for sharing your platform, allowing me to talk about this, because I think the more we can get the word out about operations, and I often tell people it's time operations also had a seat at the table. Unfortunately, sales and marketing, they tend to get the lion's share of our attention as entrepreneurs, but hey, don't forget about operations too. We're just as important. It's not that it's more important than anything else, but it definitely deserves an equal amount of attention, I would say.
Yeah, well, because I guess, one of the things, and I was going to talk to you about, another question was about tips on how people can get, achieve best in class customer experience. And sort of dovetailing into what we were talking about, your example where a business could be great at getting in the customers, but then if you don't deliver with the customer service, then those customers that you put all that effort into getting on board could very quickly disappear, and you could be back to where you started, or maybe even worse. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you can achieve, first-in-class sort of customer service.
Having that first-in-class customer service is all about truly being customer-centric. So another thing that us process practitioners talk about is the need to be customer-centric, always defining value, not from your perspective, but from your customer's perspective. So one of the exercises that we do so business infrastructure, the framework that I have, it gets you to the point of where you actually document your processes. But if you want to start actually improving your processes, which leads us to achieving that best-in-class customer experience, that's when I would recommend using a more advanced framework like Lean Six Sigma. And Lean Six Sigma is all about process improvement. And it's about creating value, but again, creating value from your customer's perspective. For example, you may make the decision, Paul, that as the leader of your company, that you now want to start delivering your services 100% remotely.
Okay.
Well, is that what your customers want? Is that really that you think that this is something that your customers are going to want, because so many of us had to transition to remote only operations because of COVID. And so, this is what my customers want. But have you really asked them that? And if the answer is no, then you need to go back and ask them, if we were to continue providing our services 100% remotely, is that okay for you? Are you okay with that? And you might find that your customers don't want that. They want to have that personalized, that high touch, in-person, face-to-face interaction with you again. So that is a classic example of you're thinking you're doing a good thing, and you're thinking that you're providing even more value, but it is completely through your lens and not through the lens of your actual customer. So when we talk about improving a process, one of the things that we talk about is value stream mapping. And what that means is literally looking at a process and going through it step by step and asking, does this step actually provide value from the customer's perspective? Yes or no? Does the next step provide value from our customer's perspective? The more no's you have, the more work you need on improving your process. Right. But again, it's always from your customer's perspective. And going through that iterative process is what ultimately gets you to achieving that best-in-class customer experience.
Sure. Now, you mentioned before, and I actually don't know what it is. I think it's software, but you said something about Sigma 8 or something. Could you explain what exactly that was?
I don't think I said Sigma 8. I said Lean Six Sigma. Is that what you're talking about?
Lean Six Sigma. Correct. Sorry. What is that?
Okay, so Lean Six Sigma there are actually two different quality or process improvement frameworks. There's Lean and then there's Six Sigma. They have been combined over the past several years into one framework. Lean stems from Toyota. And Lean is all about eliminating waste from your operations. And waste could be in the form of time, overproduction. It could be motion. There's wasted motion. Waste comes and appears in so many different forms. And Lean is all about analyzing your processes and literally stripping those processes of any waste.
Okay.
You want to work, you want to maximize output with minimal investment of in new technologies, new equipment, or anything like that.
Yeah,
That's what it means to be
absolutely.
lean. And lean was born out of, again, Toyota on the heels of, World War II. They're coming out of
Yeah.
World War II. Their country was completely decimated. But yet, how is it that they came to create one of the talk about best in class? They became this world-class manufacturing company out of nothing, and in a relatively short time, like
absolutely.
in less than 50 years, look at what they accomplished. So lean comes out of Toyota. Six Sigma comes from Motorola. So Six Sigma is all about stripping your process of defects and errors. You want to minimize. If you are producing eyeglasses, out of a batch of 1,000, let's say you have 100 that are considered defective. You can't sell them. You have to throw it away. That's waste. That's lost. That's lost income. That's lost revenue. So Six Sigma is going to say, Paul, we need to really analyze this manufacturing process for producing eyeglasses. We need to figure out, where do things go wrong? And we are going to re-engineer this process such that for every 1,000 pair of glasses that you make, there will be 0 defects. Six Sigma takes a lot longer usually to achieve, but it is so worth the effort. And it's definitely a lot more math that's involved, because you're constantly, you collect your data, you have to do all of the statistical analysis. That's where the Six Sigma comes into play. If you think of a bell curve, think of a bell curve, right? So usually when we talk about bell curves, the numbers fall in what we call somewhere between plus or minus 3 sigma. So that's usually 95. We're telling you 95% of the data, Paul, is likely going to fall between point A and point B. And I can tell you that with 95% confidence usually. Six Sigma says, okay, if this is 3 sigma, we're going to take that bell curve all the way out to 6 sigma. And I want to be 99.99999% sure that when I tell you this, this is the answer. This is how it's going to be. That's what Six Sigma is about. It's very difficult to achieve. Most companies never get there, but it is something to definitely strive for.
Yeah. So even though you may not achieve it, well, I've learned that. I had no idea. I'm pleased I asked.
Oh, you should definitely look it up. So there are different levels to the practitioners of Lean Six Sigma. It's kind of similar to karate belts. So there's yellow belt, meaning very, very basic level, There's the green belt, where you may have done a few Lean Six Sigma projects. Black belt, which is the level where I am, is you've done several Lean Six Sigma projects. And then there's Master Black Belt. That's the highest level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And are you aspiring to achieve that, or it doesn't matter?
No, because I have been offered the opportunity at least twice to pursue my Master Black Belt. I honestly just don't want to. It's almost like the equivalent of pursuing a PhD, because what I found is that the market doesn't want PhDs nearly as much as they may just want someone with a bachelor's degree.
Sure.
And the same is true with Lean Six Sigma practitioners. They tend to want more and more, they're looking for green belts, but certainly not a Master Black Belt, because it means they have to pay even more money.
Yeah. So in economics,
I fall in the middle.
Sure. In economics, we talk about diminishing returns, and that's what we're talking about here. So diminishing, it's not really worth you going to the next level